the untamed wilderness of 1760s America, where the line between civilization and savagery blurred like morning mist over mountain ridges, a young woman's fate hung in the balance of ancient tribal customs and one man's unexpected mercy. What began as a routine trading expedition would transform into a harrowing tale of survival, cultural collision, and an unlikely bond that defied everything both their worlds believed about enemies and allies. This is the true story of how captivity became sanctuary, and how a warrior's honor changed the course of two lives forever. In those days, when the Cherokee Nation still ruled the vast territories of what would become Tennessee and North Carolina, raids and counter-raids between settlers and natives were as common as thunderstorms in summer. Women and children taken during these conflicts faced uncertain fates, often becoming bargaining chips in a deadly game of territorial control. But sometimes, in the most desperate circumstances, humanity emerged where least expected, and a single act of courage could rewrite destiny itself. The morning mist still clung to the Holston River when Sarah Mackenzie stepped outside her family's cabin to draw water from the well. At 19, she possessed the kind of practical beauty that frontier life demanded, her auburn hair always neatly braided, despite the constant work that roughened her hands and strengthened her frame. The October air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves, a reminder that winter preparations couldn't wait another day. Her father, Thomas Mackenzie, had built their homestead 3 years earlier on what he believed was safe territory, far enough from the main Cherokee hunting grounds to avoid conflict, yet close enough to the river for good farming. The family had prospered here, clearing 15 acres and building a modest prosperity from corn, tobacco, and the occasional trader who stopped for supplies and news from the settlements to the east. Sarah had just lowered the wooden bucket into the well when she heard her younger brother James calling her name with unusual urgency. She looked up to see him running toward her from the edge of their cornfield, his face pale with terror. Behind him, moving like shadows through the morning mist, came 6 Cherokee warriors, painted for war. The attack happened with devastating swiftness. Sarah dropped the bucket and ran toward the cabin, shouting warnings to her family inside. Her mother, Mary, appeared in the doorway with little Rebecca in her arms, her face immediately grasping the mortal danger approaching their home. Thomas emerged with his musket, but the warriors had already surrounded the cabin with tactical precision born of generations of warfare. The leader of the Cherokee band was a man named Black Wolf, whose reputation for ruthlessness had spread throughout the frontier settlements. His face bore the distinctive tattoos of a war chief, and his presence commanded immediate respect from his followers. He had come to this valley not for random violence, but with specific purpose. Recent raids by white settlers on Cherokee villages had demanded retaliation, and Thomas Mackenzie's isolated homestead represented an opportunity to send a message while acquiring valuable captives for trade or adoption. The negotiation that followed was brief and conducted in broken English mixed with Cherokee words that Sarah didn't understand. Her father attempted to offer trade goods, furs, and even his small store of silver coins, but Black Wolf showed no interest in material wealth. His eyes moved between the family members with calculating assessment, weighing their potential value as captives against the practical difficulties of moving them through hundreds of miles of wilderness. Sarah watched in horror as her father was forced to surrender his weapons. The warriors quickly searched the cabin, taking ammunition, metal tools, and several items that caught their particular interest, including her mother's silver mirror and a small Bible with a leather cover. The systematic nature of their search revealed this was not their first raid on settler homes. The decision about captives came swiftly. Black Wolf pointed to Sarah and spoke rapid Cherokee to his warriors. 2 of them moved toward her while others maintained watch on the rest of the family. Sarah's mother began pleading in English and broken Cherokee phrases she had learned from trading encounters, offering to take her daughter's place, but the warriors ignored her desperate bargaining. As the reality of her situation became clear, Sarah felt a strange calm descend over her terror. She had heard enough stories about Indian captives to know that resistance might endanger her family further. Some captives were adopted into tribes and lived full lives among their captors, while others faced far worse fates. Her survival would depend on her ability to adapt and prove her worth to her captors. The goodbye with her family was heartbreaking in its brevity. Her mother pressed a small wooden cross into Sarah's hand, a simple thing Thomas had carved during their first winter on the frontier. Her father, his face etched with helpless rage and grief, could only whisper urgent advice about survival and keeping faith that rescue or escape might eventually come. Little Rebecca, too young to understand the full scope of what was happening, reached out her small arms in confusion as the warriors began binding Sarah's hands for the journey. Black Wolf allowed this farewell but showed clear impatience with any delay. His band had struck 3 homesteads over the past 2 days, and Cherokee custom demanded they return to their territory quickly with their prizes. The autumn weather was turning cold, and traveling with captives through mountain passes would become increasingly difficult as winter approached. The journey began immediately, with Sarah forced to walk between 2 warriors while the others maintained positions that allowed them to watch for pursuit from settlements or military patrols. Her hands remained bound, but loosely enough to maintain balance on the difficult terrain they would be crossing. The pace set by her captors was demanding but not impossible, revealing their experience in moving quickly through wilderness while managing prisoners. As they left the cleared farmland and entered the dense forest that covered the mountains between Cherokee territory and the settlements, Sarah caught her last glimpse of her family's cabin. Smoke still rose from the chimney where her mother had been preparing breakfast when the attack began, a heartbreaking symbol of the normal life that had been shattered in minutes.
The Cherokee warriors moved through the forest with impressive skill, following game trails and creek beds that left minimal sign of their passage. Sarah quickly realized that any rescue attempt would face enormous challenges simply in tracking their route, even if her father could organize help from neighboring settlements.
The warriors clearly knew this territory intimately, taking advantage of every natural feature that would conceal their movement from potential pursuers. During the first day's march, Sarah observed her captors carefully, trying to understand their intentions and assess her chances for survival. Black Wolf maintained strict discipline among his warriors, communicating primarily through hand signals and low-spoken Cherokee words. The others showed him obvious respect mixed with what appeared to be genuine affection, suggesting he was not merely a war leader, but someone whose judgment they trusted in matters beyond warfare. 2 of the younger warriors occasionally looked at Sarah with expressions she couldn't interpret, but whether their attention represented threat or curiosity remained unclear. Cherokee customs regarding captives were complex, and her fate might depend on factors she couldn't yet understand. Some captives were ceremonially adopted to replace dead tribal members, while others became slaves or trade goods to be exchanged with other tribes or even returned to white settlements for ransom. As evening approached, the band made camp in a sheltered ravine beside a clear mountain stream. The warriors worked with practiced efficiency to create a small fire using methods that produced minimal smoke, and they prepared a simple meal from dried meat and corn they carried in leather pouches. Sarah was given a share of food and allowed to drink from the stream, basic necessities that suggested her captors intended to keep her alive and healthy for whatever purposes awaited her. The night passed with Sarah under careful guard, her hands bound to prevent escape attempts but positioned to allow some rest. The warriors maintained watches throughout the darkness, and she could hear the distant calls of night animals and the whisper of wind through mountain pines. Despite her exhaustion and fear, sleep came in brief intervals, interrupted by the strangeness of her situation and uncertainty about the days ahead. Morning brought the continuation of their journey deeper into Cherokee territory, with the landscape becoming increasingly rugged and remote. Sarah's feet, accustomed to farm work but not extended hiking over rough mountain terrain, began showing signs of the strain. However, she forced herself to maintain the pace rather than risk whatever consequences might follow if she slowed the band's progress. During the second day, they encountered another Cherokee hunting party traveling in the same direction. The meeting involved extended conversation in Cherokee that Sarah couldn't follow, but she noticed increased attention directed toward her from the newcomers. One older warrior examined her with particular interest, speaking rapidly to Black Wolf in what seemed to be questions about her background and capture. This encounter made clear that news of her taking would spread quickly through Cherokee communities, and her fate was becoming a matter of broader tribal interest rather than simply Black Wolf's decision. The social and political complexities of her situation were beyond her understanding, but she sensed that powerful forces were now determining her future, according to customs and considerations she couldn't influence through her own actions. The third day brought them to the edge of what was clearly Cherokee settlement territory, marked by cleared areas, cultivated fields, and the smoke of cooking fires visible in the distance. Sarah felt a mixture of relief at reaching their destination and growing anxiety about what awaited her among people whose language she didn't speak and whose customs remained mysterious and potentially threatening. As they approached the village that would become her new reality, Sarah couldn't know that her capture had set in motion events that would challenge both Cherokee and white assumptions about enemies and allies. Nor could she imagine that among the warriors who would soon see her arrive as a prize of war, one would find reasons to risk his own standing within the tribe to offer her protection she had no right to expect. The Cherokee village that emerged from the forest was larger and more sophisticated than Sarah had expected. Over 40 dwellings constructed from logs, bark, and woven materials spread across a natural clearing beside a broad creek. Cultivated fields of corn, beans, and squash stretched beyond the residential area, and she could see people engaged in various activities that spoke of a well-organized community rather than the primitive settlement she had imagined from frontier stories. Women worked at outdoor hearths preparing food, while others engaged in weaving, pottery making, and the countless tasks necessary for sustaining a community through the approaching winter. Children played games that seemed universal despite cultural differences, and older men sat in groups engaged in conversations that ceased as Black Wolf's party approached with their captive. The arrival of a white prisoner created immediate interest throughout the village. People emerged from their dwellings and gathered at a respectful distance as Black Wolf led Sarah toward the center of the community where the council house stood. This substantial structure, larger than any building she had seen on the frontier, represented the political and ceremonial heart of Cherokee life. Among the crowd that gathered to observe her arrival, Sarah noticed one warrior who stood apart from the others. He was younger than Black Wolf, perhaps 25 years old, with an intelligent face that showed none of the hostility or curiosity she saw in other observers. Where others stared at her with the interest one might show toward an unusual trade good, this warrior's expression seemed thoughtful, even concerned. His name was Grey Eagle, though Sarah would not learn this until later. He belonged to the Wolf clan and had earned respect within the community through his skills as both warrior and hunter. Unlike many of his peers, Grey Eagle had spent time among white traders and had developed a more nuanced understanding of the cultural divide that separated Cherokee and settler communities. This experience had left him with questions about the wisdom of traditional responses to white encroachment on tribal territory. The formal presentation of Sarah as a captive followed Cherokee customs that had governed such situations for generations. Black Wolf spoke to the assembled crowd, recounting the raid and presenting her as compensation for recent Cherokee losses to white aggression. The crowd's responses suggested approval of his actions, but Sarah sensed undercurrents of disagreement about what should happen to her next. Cherokee law regarding captives was complex and allowed several possible outcomes. She could be adopted into the tribe to replace a dead family member, particularly if a clan mother chose to accept her for this purpose. She could become a slave within the community, performing labor but remaining permanently outside Cherokee social structure. Or she could be held for eventual trade or ransom, either to other tribes or back to white settlements, in exchange for Cherokee prisoners or other considerations. The decision would ultimately rest with the village council, but individual Cherokee could influence the outcome through their support or opposition to various options. As Sarah stood in the center of the gathering, she couldn't understand the Cherokee debates surrounding her fate, but she could sense the gravity of decisions being made about her future. Grey Eagle listened to these discussions with growing discomfort. He had participated in raids against white settlements and understood the necessity of retaliation for Cherokee losses. But something about Sarah's situation troubled him. Perhaps it was her obvious youth and terror, or the way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances. Whatever the source of his concern, he found himself questioning the justice of making her pay for conflicts she had not chosen. The council meeting that evening would determine Sarah's fate, but first she needed temporary housing and basic care. A middle-aged Cherokee woman named Cornflower was assigned to supervise her, provide food, and ensure she didn't attempt escape during the deliberation period. This arrangement placed Sarah in a small dwelling at the edge of the village, where she could be easily watched but wouldn't disrupt normal community activities. Cornflower spoke some English learned from trading encounters, and through their halting conversations, Sarah began to understand her precarious situation. The Cherokee had recently suffered significant losses in conflicts with white military forces, and pressure was building within the community for stronger retaliation. Her capture represented both an opportunity for revenge and a potential diplomatic tool, but these same factors made her situation extremely volatile. During her second day in the village, Sarah was allowed to move around the settlement under escort, observing daily life and beginning to understand Cherokee social structures. She watched women working at tasks similar to those she had performed on her family's farm, noted the careful attention given to children's education and training, and saw evidence of sophisticated agricultural and craft knowledge that contradicted white assumptions about Cherokee primitiveness. These observations forced Sarah to confront her own prejudices about Indian life. The Cherokee community showed clear evidence of complex social organization, artistic achievement, and practical skills that rivaled or exceeded what she had known in frontier settlements. The people she met displayed the full range of human personality and character she might encounter in any community, rather than the savage stereotypes that dominated white understanding of tribal peoples. Grey Eagle continued to observe Sarah during these days, finding opportunities to see how she interacted with community members and responded to her circumstances. Her behavior impressed him with its combination of caution and respect. She didn't attempt to impose white customs on her situation, nor did she show the arrogance or contempt that characterized some white captives. Instead, she seemed genuinely interested in understanding Cherokee ways, even in her desperate circumstances. This interest was not merely survival strategy on Sarah's part, though that certainly motivated her careful attention to Cherokee customs. She found herself genuinely fascinated by aspects of tribal life that revealed knowledge and wisdom accumulated over generations of living closely with the natural world. Cherokee agricultural techniques, their sophisticated understanding of seasonal cycles, and their complex spiritual practices all challenged her assumptions about civilization and savagery. The council meeting to determine Sarah's fate took place on her 4th day in the village. The proceedings, conducted entirely in Cherokee, remained largely incomprehensible to her, but she could sense the seriousness of the debate and the range of opinions being expressed. Some speakers seemed to advocate for harsh treatment, while others suggested more moderate approaches to her situation. Grey Eagle had requested permission to speak at this council, an unusual step for a younger warrior in matters typically handled by clan mothers and senior men. His request was granted out of respect for his previous service to the community and his reputation for sound judgment in difficult situations. What he said would surprise many who heard it and would mark a turning point in his own standing within the tribe. Speaking in formal Cherokee appropriate for council proceedings, Grey Eagle argued that killing or enslaving Sarah would accomplish nothing beyond satisfying desires for revenge that might feel good in the moment but would ultimately weaken the Cherokee position. He pointed out that their real conflicts were with white military forces and territorial governments, not with individual farm families trying to survive on the frontier. More provocatively, he suggested that treating captives with honor and eventually returning them to their families might serve Cherokee interests better than traditional approaches that only intensified white fears and hostility. This argument challenged deeply held beliefs about appropriate responses to enemy actions and implied criticism of Cherokee policies that many considered fundamental to tribal survival. The debate that followed Grey Eagle's speech was intense and sometimes heated. Older warriors questioned his loyalty to Cherokee traditions and suggested that his time among white traders had compromised his judgment. Clan mothers expressed concerns about setting precedents that might be seen as weakness by other tribes or by white authorities who would interpret Cherokee mercy as invitation for further aggression. However, Grey Eagle's arguments also found support among Cherokee who had grown weary of endless cycles of raid and retaliation that seemed to bring only increasing white pressure on tribal territories. Some pointed out that traditional Cherokee law included provisions for treating captives honorably and that mercy was as much a Cherokee virtue as courage in warfare. The discussion continued well into the night, with Sarah waiting in her temporary dwelling while her fate was decided by debates she couldn't understand in a language she didn't speak. Cornflower sat with her during this anxious time, occasionally offering reassurance through their limited shared vocabulary, but unable to explain the complexities of Cherokee decision-making that would determine whether Sarah lived or died, remained enslaved, or might eventually regain freedom. When the council finally reached its decision, the outcome reflected the divided nature of Cherokee opinion about her case. Rather than ordering her immediate death or permanent enslavement, the council chose a middle course that would allow time for further consideration while establishing a framework for her treatment within the community. Sarah would be placed under the protection of Grey Eagle, who had volunteered to take responsibility for her behavior and welfare. This arrangement made him accountable for any problems she might cause, while giving her a sponsor within Cherokee society who could advocate for her interests. It was an unusual solution that satisfied neither those who wanted harsh treatment nor those who favored immediate release, but it offered a path forward that honored Cherokee justice while avoiding irreversible actions. For Grey Eagle, accepting responsibility for Sarah represented a significant personal risk. If she attempted escape or caused problems within the community, he would face serious consequences that could include loss of status, exile, or worse. If she proved unable or unwilling to adapt to Cherokee ways, his judgment would be questioned and his future influence within the tribe diminished. But Grey Eagle had seen something in Sarah that convinced him the risk was worth taking. Her behavior during captivity had shown resilience, intelligence, and respect for Cherokee customs, even in desperate circumstances. These qualities suggested she might be capable of bridging the cultural divide that separated Cherokee and white communities, perhaps offering insights that could benefit both peoples in their inevitable future encounters. When Cornflower brought news of the council's decision to Sarah, the relief was overwhelming, despite the uncertainty that remained about her ultimate fate. She would live, at least for the immediate future, and she would have a protector who had voluntarily assumed responsibility for her welfare. This unexpected mercy came from a people she had been taught to regard as savages, offered by a warrior who had no obligation to show her kindness. The irony of her situation was not lost on Sarah as she tried to sleep that night in her small dwelling at the edge of the Cherokee village. She had found protection and mercy among her enemies while facing the possibility that her own people, if they learned of her location, might attempt a rescue that could result in her death along with those of Cherokee, who had chosen to spare her life. The arrangement placing Sarah under Grey Eagle's protection began the most transformative period of her captivity. Unlike the formal supervision she had experienced under Cornflower, this new situation required her to integrate more fully into Cherokee daily life, while learning to navigate the complex relationship with her protector. Grey Eagle's dwelling was located in the better section of the village, reflecting his status as an accomplished warrior and successful hunter. The structure consisted of a main room with a central fire pit, sleeping areas separated by woven screens, and storage spaces for weapons, tools, and food supplies. The interior showed evidence of both practical functionality and aesthetic considerations that spoke to Cherokee appreciation for beauty alongside utility. Living arrangements required careful negotiation of cultural and personal boundaries that neither Sarah nor Grey Eagle fully understood at first. Cherokee customs governing relationships between men and women included specific protocols that Sarah needed to learn quickly to avoid causing scandal or offense within the community. Grey Eagle, despite his familiarity with white customs, found himself equally challenged by the need to balance protection of his reputation with genuine care for Sarah's welfare. Their communication began with a mixture of broken English, basic Cherokee words, and extensive use of gestures and demonstrations. Grey Eagle possessed more English vocabulary than most Cherokee, acquired through trading relationships and previous encounters with white settlers. Sarah proved quick to learn Cherokee phrases, motivated by both practical necessity and growing genuine interest in the language and culture surrounding her. These language lessons became opportunities for cultural exchange that revealed the depth of misunderstanding between Cherokee and white communities. Sarah discovered that Cherokee possessed sophisticated concepts for describing relationships with the natural world that had no equivalent in English. Grey Eagle learned that white farming and social practices, while different from Cherokee ways, emerged from practical responses to environmental and social challenges rather than mere ignorance or evil intent. As autumn progressed toward winter, Sarah's integration into village life accelerated out of practical necessity. Cherokee survival through the cold months required extensive preparation and cooperation among community members. Sarah's farming experience proved valuable in food preservation activities, while her domestic skills contributed to textile production and other essential tasks. Her participation in these communal activities gradually shifted her status within the village from exotic captive to contributing community member. Cherokee women who had initially regarded her with suspicion began accepting her presence and occasionally seeking her input on tasks where her experience might be useful. This acceptance didn't represent full membership in Cherokee society, but it marked important progress toward a sustainable living situation. Grey Eagle's role as her protector evolved during this period from formal obligation to something approaching genuine partnership. Their shared work on daily survival tasks created opportunities for conversation and mutual understanding that went far beyond the basic communication necessary for managing her captive status. Sarah found herself increasingly curious about Grey Eagle's perspectives on the conflicts between Cherokee and white communities, while he sought her insights into white motivations and decision-making processes. These conversations revealed the tragic nature of the cultural collision taking place throughout the frontier region. Both Cherokee and white communities were responding to perceived threats and pressures with strategies that, while rational from their own perspectives, inevitably intensified the very conflicts they sought to resolve. Cherokee raids on white settlements were intended to discourage further territorial encroachment, but they strengthened white determination to eliminate the Indian threat through military action. White military campaigns against Cherokee villages were designed to establish security for settlements, but they convinced Cherokee leaders that only fierce resistance could preserve tribal independence. Sarah and Grey Eagle found themselves uniquely positioned to understand both sides of these tragic miscalculations, but their insights remained largely irrelevant to the broader political forces driving the conflict toward its inevitable conclusion. Cherokee society, like white settlements, included voices calling for accommodation and those demanding uncompromising resistance. The balance between these positions shifted constantly in response to new provocations and changing circumstances. Winter's arrival brought both relief and new challenges to Sarah's situation. The harsh weather that made travel difficult also reduced the likelihood of military expeditions or rescue attempts that might threaten the fragile stability of her position within the Cherokee community. However, the close quarters and limited activity of winter months intensified social dynamics that could either strengthen or destroy the relationships she had been building with her captors. Cherokee winter customs included extensive storytelling traditions that served both entertainment and educational functions during the long evenings when outdoor activity was limited. Sarah's participation in these gatherings marked another stage in her integration into tribal life, as she learned Cherokee history, mythology, and moral teachings through oral traditions that stretched back generations. These stories revealed the complexity and sophistication of Cherokee intellectual life in ways that surprised and impressed Sarah. The narratives contain detailed historical accounts of tribal migrations and interactions with other peoples, sophisticated moral and ethical teachings, and profound insights into human nature and the proper relationship between people and the natural world. Many of these teachings directly challenged assumptions about Indian primitiveness that dominated white thinking about tribal peoples. Grey Eagle's own storytelling abilities were considerable, and his accounts of Cherokee history often included perspectives on white contact that differed dramatically from the stories Sarah had learned about Indian relations. According to Cherokee oral tradition, early encounters with white traders and settlers had often been positive, marked by mutual benefit and respect. The current cycle of violence and mistrust represented a tragic departure from earlier patterns of coexistence that both peoples had once maintained successfully. These revelations forced Sarah to confront uncomfortable questions about the role her own people had played in destroying possibilities for peaceful coexistence. Cherokee accounts of broken treaties, unfair trade practices, and territorial seizures painted white actions in a light very different from the self-defensive narratives that justified frontier violence in white communities. While she couldn't accept full responsibility for policies she had no part in making, Sarah found herself feeling genuine shame for some aspects of white behavior toward tribal peoples. This growing understanding of Cherokee perspectives didn't require Sarah to abandon her own cultural identity or condemn everything about white civilization. Instead, it opened her mind to the possibility that cultural differences didn't necessarily require cultural conflict, and that mutual understanding might offer alternatives to the warfare that was destroying both communities. Grey Eagle underwent a similar process of expanding understanding through his relationship with Sarah. Her accounts of white family life, community organization, and agricultural practices revealed positive aspects of settler culture that Cherokee opponents of white expansion rarely acknowledged. Her obvious love for her family and grief at their separation demonstrated emotional depths that contradicted Cherokee stereotypes about white callousness and materialism. As winter deepened, the relationship between Sarah and Grey Eagle evolved beyond protector and protected towards something approaching genuine friendship. Their conversations ranged from practical matters of daily survival to philosophical discussions about the nature of justice, the meaning of honor, and the possibility of peace between their peoples. These discussions often took place during long evenings, when the demands of survival allowed time for reflection and deeper communication. This friendship created complications within Cherokee society that both Sarah and Grey Eagle recognized but couldn't entirely resolve. Traditional Cherokee customs didn't provide clear guidance for relationships between warriors and white captives that transcended simple protection arrangements. Some community members began to question whether Grey Eagle's commitment to Sarah indicated divided loyalty that might compromise his effectiveness as a Cherokee defender. Similar concerns arose about Sarah's position within the community. Her integration into Cherokee daily life had proceeded successfully, but this very success raised questions about her ultimate intentions and loyalties. Would she use her knowledge of Cherokee customs and village layout to assist white military forces if rescue or escape became possible? Could a white woman ever truly become Cherokee, or would she always represent a potential security threat to the community that had protected her? These questions became more than theoretical when spring arrived and resumed the seasonal cycle of military activity that had been suspended during winter months. Reports reached the village of new white settlements established during the winter, and Cherokee raids launched against these encroachments. The possibility of military expeditions against Cherokee villages returned as a constant concern that affected all aspects of community life. Grey Eagle faced increasing pressure from other Cherokee warriors to clarify his intentions regarding Sarah's long-term status. The protection arrangement that had worked during winter months seemed increasingly inadequate for managing the security concerns that would intensify as military activity resumed. Some argued that the time had come to either fully adopt Sarah into the tribe through formal Cherokee ceremonies, or to trade her back to white authorities before her continued presence created greater problems. The debate over Sarah's fate reopened divisions within Cherokee leadership that had been temporarily suppressed during the winter months. Those who had never supported Grey Eagle's protection arrangement saw vindication in the practical difficulties now emerging from the situation. Those who favored accommodation with white communities pointed to Sarah's successful integration as evidence that peaceful coexistence remained possible if both sides approached cultural differences with respect and understanding. For Sarah herself, the arrival of spring brought mixed emotions that she struggled to reconcile. Part of her longed for reunion with her family and return to the life she had known before capture, but another part recognized that her months among the Cherokee had changed her in fundamental ways that might make simple return to white society impossible. She had gained insights into alternative ways of organizing social life and relating to the natural world that challenged basic assumptions of frontier culture. More personally, she had developed genuine affection and respect for Grey Eagle that complicated her feelings about the prospect of leaving Cherokee territory. Their friendship had grown into something deeper than mutual convenience or even gratitude for his protection. She found herself caring about his welfare and concerned about the consequences he might face if white military forces attacked the village, or if her continued presence created political problems within Cherokee society. The crisis that would determine both their fates arrived with news that a large white military expedition was being organized to attack Cherokee villages in retaliation for spring raids on frontier settlements. This force would be large enough to threaten even well-defended Cherokee communities, and its approach would require immediate decisions about Sarah's status that could no longer be postponed for political convenience. Grey Eagle knew that Sarah's presence during a military attack could prove disastrous for both of them. White soldiers might kill her along with Cherokee defenders, or they might assume her apparent integration into tribal life indicated willing collaboration with the enemy. Cherokee warriors might see her as a liability that compromised their defensive preparations, or as a potential source of intelligence for attacking forces. The solution that emerged required courage from both Sarah and Grey Eagle, along with wisdom that transcended the narrow interests of their respective communities. Rather than waiting for military action that would likely result in death for many Cherokee, and might well include Sarah among the casualties, they decided to attempt a dangerous mission that could potentially save lives on both sides, while offering Sarah a path toward reunion with her family. Their plan involved Sarah's voluntary return to white settlements, with detailed information about Cherokee intentions and capabilities that might convince military leaders to pursue negotiation rather than attack. This information would be highly sensitive and potentially dangerous to Cherokee security, but Grey Eagle believed that honest communication about Cherokee positions might offer better prospects for avoiding catastrophic warfare than continued mutual ignorance and fear. For Sarah, agreeing to this plan meant accepting responsibility for accurately representing Cherokee perspectives to white audiences likely to be hostile to any information that complicated their assumptions about Indian treachery and barbarism. She would need to convince white leaders that Cherokee military preparations were defensive responses to white aggression rather than evidence of unprovoked savage hostility. The personal cost of this decision was enormous for both of them. Grey Eagle was risking his standing within Cherokee society by providing sensitive information to potential enemies. Sarah was leaving the protection and community she had found among people she had learned to respect and care about. Both were gambling their lives on the possibility that mutual understanding might offer alternatives to mutual destruction. As they prepared for Sarah's departure from the village that had become her home, both recognized that their friendship had created something rare and precious in a world increasingly divided by cultural hatred and fear. Their relationship proved that understanding across cultural boundaries was possible when individuals approached each other with respect, curiosity, and genuine concern for human welfare above tribal loyalty. The morning of Sarah's departure was marked by ceremonies that honored both her contributions to Cherokee community life and Grey Eagle's courage in protecting her against considerable opposition. Village elders who had initially opposed her presence now acknowledged that her time among them had challenged Cherokee assumptions about white people in ways that might prove valuable for future relations between the communities. Sarah's goodbye with Grey Eagle was necessarily brief but carried emotional weight that both would remember for the rest of their lives. They had shared an experience that transcended the political categories that defined their peoples as enemies, creating bonds of understanding and affection that no amount of cultural conflict could entirely destroy. As Sarah began her journey back toward white settlements, carrying messages from Cherokee leaders who hoped against hope that warfare might still be avoided, she carried also the knowledge that honor and mercy could emerge in the most unlikely circumstances. Grey Eagle had chosen to protect her when he had every reason to see her as an enemy. That choice had grown into friendship that proved the possibility of mutual respect between peoples who seemed destined for eternal conflict. The ultimate impact of their unlikely alliance would depend on whether the broader forces driving Cherokee and white communities toward war could be influenced by individual acts of courage and understanding. But regardless of these larger outcomes, Both Sarah and Grey Eagle had discovered that the human capacity for mercy and friendship could survive even in circumstances designed to destroy such possibilities.